Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberNetters System Administration course. I'm Andrew Yick, and in today's session, we'll be exploring the fundamentals of software licensing, a crucial topic for anyone managing IT systems. Now, if you've ever wondered why you can't just buy software outright or why some software is free while others cost a fortune, this video is for you. By the end of this session, you have a more clear understanding of what software licensing is, the different types, and why it's so important for both legal and practical reasons. Let's dive in. Alright, let's get into the basics of software licensing. Here's something interesting. When you get software, you don't actually own it. Instead, you're licensed to use it. Why? Because software is protected by copyright laws and can be copied easily. Think of it like a library book. When you borrow a book, you don't own it. You're allowed to read it for a while, and there are rules about how you can use it. That is the same idea with software licensing. Now, let's talk about why this matters. For many IT systems, licensing costs can be the highest expense over time. It is a big part of the total cost of ownership, so understanding it is essential for managing budgets effectively. Finally, there are two big categories of software licenses. Proprietary software. Think of it like renting a car. You can use it, but there are restrictions. The second one is free or open source software. Think of it as more like owning the car. You can customize it, share it, or even rebuild it if you want. So why do you think software companies choose to license instead of sell outright? And which type of license, proprietary or open source, sounds better to you so far? Now let's talk about license agreements, the fine print that tells you how you can and can't use software. These arguments define what's permissible. They often prohibit things like reverse engineering, digging into the code, redistribution, sharing it with others, and they limit the copyrights holder's liability. You've probably seen these arguments before. Those long walls of text you click accept on before installing software. These are called end user license agreements, or EULAs. They're like the rulebook for using your software. Now, there are also different types of licenses to keep in mind. The first one is off the shelf licenses. Think of these as a general purpose software that you buy at a store or download. OEM licenses. These come bundled with softwares like the software pre-installed on a new computer. So why do you think companies include restrictions like no reverse engineering? And have you ever actually read an EULA before clicking accept? Next is proprietary licensing, one of the most common types of software licenses. Here's the key idea. When you use proprietary software, the ownership stays with the publisher. You're only getting a license to use it, and that license comes with pretty strict limitations. For example, you can't reverse engineer the software to see how it works. You can't modify the source code or make changes. You can't distribute it to others. Before you can even install the software, you have to accept the terms of the license. It's like signing a contract that says, I agree to follow these rules. So think of it like renting a house. You can live there, but you can't knock down the walls, change the paint, or sublease it to someone else. The landlord, or in this case, the software publisher, makes the rules. Why do you think companies limit what you can do with proprietary software? And how do you think this impacts innovation or creativity? Now that we know what proprietary licensing is, let's look at the different models used to license software. First, there's time-based licensing. So a perpetual license is basically pay once, and you get to use the software forever, kind of like buying a lifetime membership to a gym. An annual license is pay yearly, and you usually get updates and upgrades included. Think of it like a streaming subscription with added perks. A software rental is pay only when you need it. This is great for temporary use, like trying out demo versions or using software you only need occasionally. Next, there's deployment-based licensing, which focuses on how the software is used. So first, there's standalone licensing. Basically, individual licenses, each machine needs its own license. It's like assigning a specific seat on an airplane to each passenger. A floating license is they allow a set number of people to use the software, no matter how many installations exist. So imagine sharing one library book among a group. Only one person can read it at a time. And then there's the client or server licensing. The first one is per connection license, which limits the amount of simultaneous connections to a server. It's like having only a few parking spots for a busy lot. And then there's client access licenses or CALs. These are tied to each client using the server. It's like buying individual tickets for everyone entering a museum. So, which model do you think makes the most sense for your needs? And why do you think companies use different models instead of just one? Let's talk about software maintenance, an important add-on service that often comes with proprietary licensing. Here's how it works. You pay an annual fee on top of the software license to get extra benefits. What do you get for that fee? You get functionality upgrades and security fixes. So think of it as getting regular tune-ups for your car to keep it running smoothly and safely. You also get enhanced support tiers. So do you need faster or more specialized help? These higher tier plans give you premium support for a higher cost. Also, one important note. To access software maintenance, you need a valid software license. So why do you think companies separate maintenance costs from the license itself? And why or when do you think it's worth paying for software maintenance? Now let's talk about volume licensing, which is a system designed for organizations like schools, governments, or businesses that need to install software on lots of devices. With volume licensing, you get one key that validates multiple copies of software. This makes it more convenient and cost effective for large scale use. Over time, volume licensing has evolved. So in the early days, there weren't great ways to keep track of how many copies were installed. This made it easier for people to misuse the system. Today, most people use activation mechanisms like key management services, KMS, to solve this. So what's KMS? It's a centralized system that validates licenses for multiple devices. So for KMS to work, there's a minimum activation threshold, like 25 clients or 5 servers. This ensures that software is only used in large environments as intended. So think of KMS like a group ticket to a concert. The ticket allows a certain number of people to enter, but everyone has to check in at a gate to confirm that they're part of the group. So why do you think companies use activation threshold? And how might this system prevent piracy? Now let's talk about open source licensing, which works very differently from proprietary licensing. Here's the key idea. When you use open source software, the ownership of the copy transferred to you, but the copyright still remains with the publisher. So what does this mean for you as a user? You get a lot more freedom. You can now reverse engineer the software to see how it works. You can also modify the source code to suit your needs. And you can even redistribute the software, including your modifications. But there are some conditions to that. If you redistribute modifications, you must include the source code. And you can't reintroduce copyright restrictions. Once it's open source, it stays open source. So, for example, some examples of open source licenses are GNU General Public License, or GPL. It's a very common license, but it's more restrictive than others. The BSD license. It started with the BSD operating system and is now used for many applications. The MIT license covers popular software like X, Windows, and PuTTY. So think of open source like a recipe you get from a friend. You use it, you tweak it, you share with others, but you can't claim it as your own or stop others from sharing it too. So why do you think some companies choose open software over proprietary licensing? And how might this approach benefit users and developers? Let's talk about software audits, which are like routine checkups for your software licenses to ensure everything's in order. So why are audits important? They help make sure your organization is compliant with licensing rules and avoid monetary fines. These can add up fast for unlicensed softwares or legal liabilities, including lawsuits or penalties. So some types of software audits include internal audits. So your team checks everything in-house. Think of it like doing your own spring cleaning. Voluntary audits. You bring in an outside expert to check compliance, like hiring a professional organizer. Or force audits, where vendors may step in and demand an audit if they suspect something's off. This is like getting an unexpected inspection. So, what's the key to passing an audit? Keep good records. Always have your licenses and invoices ready as proof of purchase. It's like keeping your receipts handy during tax season, just in case. Think of an audit like a surprise visit from a landlord. If everything's in order, no problem. But if they find something out of place, like unauthorized changes, it can lead to big trouble. So, how often do you think businesses should audit their softwares? And what steps would you take to make sure your records are always up to date? Now, let's look at the external audit sources, the groups that might step up to check whether your software usage is compliant. Here are the main players. The first one is vendor audits. While rare, vendors can initiate audits directly or hire third parties to do it for them. Think of it as their software maker checking to ensure that you're following the rules of their license. The second one is Software and Information Industry Association, or SIIA. This group is known for anti-piracy efforts like their famous campaign, Don't Copy That Floppy. They act on behalf of software and vendors to enforce compliance. The third one is Business Software Alliance, or BSA. The BSA represents big companies like Microsoft, Dell, and Adobe. They have known to use aggressive tactics like offering whistleblower records, money for employees who report licensing violations at their companies. Let's wrap up by discussing the role of security and compliance in software licensing, especially the measures taken to prevent piracy. Software companies use various tools to ensure that their licenses are being used properly. For example, activation systems. Tools like Microsoft Windows Genuine Advantage verify that your copy of the software is legitimate. Volume key, license key VLK verification. Managed through systems like Key Management Services, KMS, which we discussed earlier. But here's the thing, no system is perfect. Over time, hackers have found ways to bypass these protections. For example, the infamous timestop 2TA exploit showed how clever some tricks could undermine early activation systems. So think of these mechanisms like locks on a door. While most people respect the locks, some people try to pick it or find a hidden entrance. That is why companies are always improving their security measures. So why do you think hackers target licensing systems? And what can businesses do to stay one step ahead? So that wraps up our overview of software licensing. We've covered the essentials, everything from basics of licensing proprietary and open source models to volume licensing, maintenance, and compliance audits. I hope this gave you a more clear understanding of how software licensing works and why it's so important for managing IT systems effectively. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay secure and keep learning with CyberNetters.